The flames licked at Hope Wilson's heels as she fled through the night, her heart pounding as fiercely as her footsteps on the dry California earth. Behind her, everything she had ever known crumbled to ash: her father's general store, their modest home above it, and any semblance of the life she had carefully built over her 23 years. The accusation still rang in her ears, drowning out even the roar of the fire that devoured half of Murphy's, California, on that fateful autumn night of 1876. Stop her! She started the fire. The angry voices followed her as she ran, clutching nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket around her neck. Hope had been closing the store when she smelled smoke. By the time she realized what was happening, the neighboring saloon was already engulfed, and fingers were pointing at her, the woman who had rejected the town's most influential man only hours earlier. Running wasn't a choice she made. It was an instinct that carried her away from the mob that had formed, their fury fanned by James Harker's wealth and influence. For 3 days, Hope traveled on foot, hiding during the day and moving at night. Her once tidy dress was torn and smudged with dirt, her auburn hair falling in tangled waves around her face. The early October chill bit through her thin clothing as she stumbled through unfamiliar territory, hunger and exhaustion making her steps unsteady. On the morning of the 4th day, Hope crested a small hill and saw a cabin nestled in a valley below, smoke rising gently from its chimney. It was modest but well-maintained, with a small corral housing several horses. A barn stood nearby and fields stretched out behind it, golden with the season's harvest. She hesitated, her body trembling with both hope and fear. The last time she had trusted anyone in her desperate flight, the stagecoach driver had recognized her from the wanted posters that had somehow preceded her. She had barely escaped when he stopped to water the horses. But the gnawing in her stomach and the dizziness that threatened to overcome her made the decision inevitable. She would die without help. Taking a deep breath, Hope made her way down the hill, her legs giving way just as she reached the edge of the property. The world tilted and darkened around her. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was a tall figure rushing toward her from the direction of the barn, the morning sun gleaming off what appeared to be a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. When Hope awoke, she was lying on a bed covered with a patchwork quilt. The room was small but clean, with simple furnishings: a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a chair where a man sat watching her. She bolted upright, fear coursing through her veins. The man raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Easy there, miss. You're safe." His voice was deep and steady, with a hint of a drawl that suggested he wasn't native to California. Hope's eyes darted to his chest, where she had seen the badge earlier, but it wasn't there. Instead, he wore a simple blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice cracking from thirst. "Name's Kieran Nash," he replied, reaching for a cup of water on the nightstand and offering it to her. "Found you collapsed at the edge of my property this morning. Thought you might be dead until I saw you breathing." Hope took the water gratefully, taking small sips as she studied him. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and a few days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. His eyes were a striking shade of blue, watching her carefully. "Thank you," she said, lowering the cup. "I'm Elizabeth Johnson." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't risk her real name, not when posters with her face and the word arson might have reached even this remote place. A flicker of something doubt, perhaps, crossed his face, but he nodded. "Well, Miss Johnson, you're welcome to stay until you're back on your feet. I've got plenty of space, and from the looks of you, you could use a few decent meals." "I saw a badge," Hope said cautiously. "Are you a lawman?" A shadow passed over his features. "Used to be. Deputy sheriff over in Sonora. That was a lifetime ago." He stood, his tall frame filling the small room. "Rest now. There's stew on the stove when you're ready to eat. Bathrooms through that door if you want to clean up." Before she could thank him again, he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Hope sank back against the pillow, relief and wariness battling within her. She was safe for the moment, but for how long? And what would Kieran Nash do if he discovered who she really was and what she was accused of? After washing up and changing into a simple dress Kieran had left for her, likely belonging to a sister or previous guest, Hope ventured out of the bedroom. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from the hill, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows let in the afternoon light, illuminating the practical but comfortable furnishings. Kieran was nowhere to be seen, but as promised, a pot of stew simmered on the stove. Hope helped herself to a bowl, realizing as she took the first bite just how famished she truly was. She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful of the surprisingly delicious meal: tender beef, potatoes, carrots, and herbs in a rich broth. The door opened and Kieran entered, bringing with him the scents of hay and horses. He nodded at her, seemingly pleased to see her up and eating. "The stew is wonderful," Hope said. "You're quite the cook." "Had to learn," he replied, washing his hands in a basin by the door. "Living alone out here doesn't leave much choice." "Have you always been alone?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Kieran's face closed just for a moment before he answered. "No, but that's a story for another time." He gestured to her bowl. "Finish eating. You need your strength." Hope wanted to press further but sensed it would be unwise. Instead, she changed the subject. "Your land is beautiful. How long have you been here?" 5 years, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Built this place with my own hands." The land was cheap, too remote for most folks' liking. "It's peaceful," Hope observed. "I can see why you choose it." Kieran studied her over the rim of his cup. "Most women wouldn't think so. Most would find it lonely." "Perhaps I've had enough of crowds for a while," she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Running from something, Miss Johnson?" The question was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Hope set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "Isn't everyone in one way or another?" He held her gaze for a long moment before nodding. "Fair enough. Your business is your own, at least for now." He gestured to her empty bowl. "If you're done eating, I could use a hand with the evening chores. Nothing too strenuous, but it might help take your mind off whatever's troubling you." Grateful for both his discretion and the distraction, Hope followed him outside. The late afternoon sun bathed the valley in golden light, revealing the full extent of Kieran's homestead. Besides the cabin, barn, and corral, there was a chicken coop, a vegetable garden, and fields where wheat had recently been harvested. In the distance, a small herd of cattle grazed on the hillside. "It's larger than I thought," Hope remarked, taking in the scene. "Started small," Kieran said, leading her toward the chicken coop. "Added a little each year. This season's been good to me." He showed her how to gather eggs, then set her to work feeding the chickens while he attended to the horses in the corral. Hope found herself enjoying the simple task, the routine of it calming her frayed nerves. As she worked, she watched Kieran move among the animals, his movements confident and gentle. He spoke softly to each horse as he brushed them down, his deep voice carrying on the evening breeze. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Hope felt more at peace than she had in days, the physical activity having cleared her mind somewhat. "Thank you," she said as they entered the cabin, "for letting me help. I needed that." Kieran nodded. "Work has a way of settling the soul, at least it always has for me." He lit a lamp on the table, its warm glow filling the room. "There's coffee left if you want some." They sat across from each other at the wooden table, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. Hope cradled her cup, gathering courage for what she needed to say next. "Mr. Nash, I'm grateful for your hospitality, but I should move on tomorrow. I don't want to impose." Kieran leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air. Hope had no answer, no destination in mind beyond away. "I don't know," she admitted softly, "but I can't stay here. It's not safe for you." His eyebrows rose slightly. "For me? Or for you, Miss Johnson, if that is your name?" Hope felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" Kieran sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I may live alone out here, but I do ride into town occasionally. Saw some posters there yesterday. Woman named Hope Wilson, wanted for starting a fire that burned half of Murphy's." His eyes held hers steadily. "You match the description pretty well." Fear clutched at Hope's throat, rendering her momentarily speechless. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. "Are you going to turn me in?" "That depends," he replied. "Did you do it?" "No." The denial burst from her with such force that she nearly knocked over her cup. "I didn't start that fire. I was closing my father's store when it began in the saloon next door. But James Harker, he's the richest man in town, he—" She paused, embarrassed. "He what?" Kieran prompted. "He asked for my hand that morning. I refused him. He wasn't pleased." Hope twisted her hands in her lap. "When the fire started, he was the first to point the finger at me, and people believed him because he owns half the businesses in town, including the bank that holds most of their mortgages." Kieran was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and walked to a cabinet near the fireplace. He returned with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, pouring a small amount in each. "Drink," he said, sliding one toward her. "It helps." Hope had never tasted whiskey before, but she took a cautious sip, wincing as it burned down her throat. "You believe me?" "I've seen what powerful men can do when they don't get their way," Kieran replied, his voice hard. "And I've learned to trust my instincts about people." "You don't strike me as an arsonist." Relief washed over Hope, making her feel lightheaded. "Thank you. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm a danger to you. If anyone finds out you're harboring me, let me worry about that," he cut in. "Winter's coming. The mountain passes will be snowed in soon. No one's likely to come looking for you here until spring at the earliest. You're offering to let me stay? For the winter?" Hope couldn't hide her disbelief. Kieran shrugged. "Could use the help around here. Place this size is a lot for one person to manage." He finished his whiskey in one swallow. "Besides, I've been on the wrong side of accusations myself. Know what it's like when no one believes your side of the story." There was pain in those words, a deep-seated hurt that resonated with Hope's own. She wanted to ask what had happened, what had driven this former lawman to such isolation, but she held her tongue. He had given her space, she would do the same. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll earn my keep, I promise." Kieran nodded, rising from the table. "Get some rest. Mornings start early around here." As Hope returned to the small bedroom, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after the fire. Hope. Perhaps here, in this remote valley with this quiet, mysterious man, she could find a way to rebuild what she had lost. Not just a home, but her sense of safety, of belonging. She didn't know yet if she could trust Kieran Nash completely, but something told her she had little choice. For now, at least, their fates were intertwined. The next morning, Hope awoke to the sounds of movement in the cabin. The sky outside her window was still dark, but a faint grayness suggested dawn wasn't far off. She dressed quickly in the clothes Kieran had provided, a simple skirt and blouse that were slightly too large but clean and serviceable. When she entered the main room, Kieran was already by the stove frying bacon and eggs. He glanced up at her approach, nodding in approval at her early rising. "Coffee's ready," he said, gesturing to the pot. Hope poured herself a cup, wrapping her hands around it for warmth. The cabin was chilly in the pre-dawn hours, the fire in the hearth only just beginning to take the edge off. "What can I do to help?" she asked. "Set the table," Kieran replied. "Plates are in that cupboard." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, the only sounds the clink of cutlery against plates and the occasional crackle from the fire. Outside, the sky gradually lightened, revealing a landscape shrouded in early morning mist. "What needs doing today?" Hope asked as she collected their empty plates. "Thought I'd show you around properly," Kieran said, rising from the table. "Need to know how things work if you're staying the winter." He led her outside as the sun crested the eastern hills, illuminating the valley in soft golden light. The mist was burning off, revealing the full beauty of the landscape. Hope breathed deeply, savoring the clean mountain air, so different from the smoke-filled atmosphere of her last memories of Murphy's. Kieran was a patient teacher, showing her the daily routines of the ranch, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, tending the vegetable garden that still yielded late-season produce. He explained the irrigation system he developed to channel water from the nearby stream to his fields, and pointed out the boundaries of his property, marked by stands of pine trees and natural rock formations. "It's impressive what you've built here," Hope remarked as they walked back toward the cabin around midday. "All by yourself." Kieran's expression was unreadable. "Wasn't entirely alone when I started, had help for the first couple of years." "Oh," Hope ventured, hoping he might elaborate. A shadow crossed his face. "My brother Kyle, he came out west with me after." He paused, "after I left my position as deputy." "Is he—" Hope hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question. "Dead, no," Kieran's voice was flat. "At least not that I know of." He moved on. Said this life was too quiet for him. "Last I heard, he was in San Francisco." There was more to the story, Hope could sense it, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "What about family back east?" "Parents died when we were young. It was just me and Kyle mostly." Kieran stopped at the edge of the vegetable garden. "Need to harvest these carrots before the first frost. You can help with that this afternoon." The abrupt change of subject made it clear the conversation about his past was over. Hope nodded, accepting the boundary he'd set. They spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling carrots, onions, and late potatoes from the rich soil. Hope found satisfaction in the work, in seeing the baskets fill with food that would sustain them through the coming winter. It had been years since she'd done such labor. Her duties at her father's store had kept her indoors most days. "You're good at this," Kieran observed as she efficiently sorted the vegetables, separating those to be eaten soon from those that would be stored. Hope smiled, pleased by the compliment. "My mother had a garden when I was young. She taught me before she died." "How old were you?" Kieran asked, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. 12, Hope replied, the memory still painful even after all these years. "Influenza. My father never remarried. It was just the two of us until—" Her voice caught as she thought of her father left behind in Murphy's. Had he survived the fire? Was he looking for her? Or did he too believe she was guilty? "Until the fire," Kieran finished for her, understanding in his eyes. "I'm sorry. About your mother and about what you're going through now." Hope blinked back tears. "Thank you. I just hope my father is all right. He wasn't at the store when the fire started. He'd gone to visit friends outside town." "That's good," Kieran said. "Means he's probably safe." "But he doesn't know I am," Hope whispered. "He must be so worried." Kieran was silent for a moment, then said, "There might be a way to get word to him come spring without putting either of you at risk." Hope looked up, hope flaring in her chest. "How? I have a friend in Sacramento. Former lawman like me. He could make inquiries, deliver a message discreetly." "You do that for me?" Hope asked, touched by the offer. Kieran shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's what anyone would do." "No," Hope said softly. "It's not. Most people would have turned me in without a second thought, especially with a reward at stake." "There's a reward?" Kieran raised an eyebrow. Hope nodded, her chest tight with anxiety. $500. Harker's money, no doubt. Kieran let out a low whistle. "That's a substantial sum." "I understand if it changes things," Hope said quickly, fear returning. "If you need the money, stop." Kieran's voice was firm but not unkind. "I'm not turning you in, reward or no reward. I meant what I said yesterday. I don't believe you started that fire." Relief flooded through Hope, and she impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "Thank you." Kieran stiffened slightly at the contact but didn't pull away. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Hope felt a strange flutter in her chest. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should get these inside," he said, gesturing to the baskets of vegetables. "Storm's coming." Hope looked up, noticing for the first time the dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. They worked quickly to bring in the harvest, finishing just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Safe inside the cabin, they spent the evening preserving some of the vegetables and preparing a hearty stew for dinner. The rain pattered steadily on the roof, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the occasional rumble of thunder. As they ate, Hope found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since that morning. "Kieran, why did you leave your position as deputy sheriff, if you don't mind me asking?" He was quiet for so long that Hope thought he wouldn't answer. Then, setting down his spoon, he said, "I shot a man, an innocent man." Hope's eyes widened. "Oh, it wasn't." Kieran ran a hand over his face. "There was a bank robbery, multiple suspects fleeing in different directions. I was pursuing one of them when a man came running out of an alley. He had a gun. I reacted without thinking." He took a deep breath. "Turned out he was a shopkeeper who'd grabbed his weapon when he heard the commotion, was trying to help." "Did he survive?" Hope asked softly. Kieran shook his head, his eyes haunted. "He died 2 days later. Left behind a wife and 3 children." He stared into his stew, his appetite apparently gone. "I couldn't wear the badge after that, couldn't face the town. My brother and I packed up and headed west as far as we could go." "It was an accident," Hope said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "A terrible accident, but you were doing your job." Kieran's laugh was bitter. "That's what the inquest said too, but it didn't matter. Every time I closed my eyes I saw his face, still do sometimes." Hope understood then why he had believed her story so readily, why he had taken her in. He knew what it was like to be haunted by something you couldn't change, to have your life altered irrevocably in a single moment. "Is that why you built this place? To escape the memories?" she asked. Kieran nodded. "Thought if I created something with my hands, something good and lasting, it might balance the scales somehow." He looked around the cabin at the sturdy walls and comfortable furnishings. "Hasn't worked entirely, but it helps." Hope squeezed his hand, then withdrew, suddenly self-conscious of the intimacy of the gesture. "I think what you've created here is remarkable, and taking me in, helping me when everyone else would condemn me, that counts for something too." A ghost of a smile touched Kieran's lips. "Maybe so." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal, but something had changed between them. A barrier had fallen, a trust established that hadn't been there before. As Hope lay in bed that night, listening to the rain on the roof, she felt a curious warmth in her chest whenever she thought of Kieran, his strength, his kindness, and the vulnerability he had shown her. It was dangerous, she knew, to develop feelings for the man who was sheltering her. Her life was in limbo, her future uncertain. And yet, as sleep claimed her, Hope found herself looking forward to the next day, and the next, and all the days of the coming winter in this remote valley with Kieran Nash. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm as Hope and Kieran prepared the ranch for winter. October gave way to November, bringing colder temperatures and occasional dustings of snow that melted by midday. Each morning, they rose before dawn to tend to the animals and share a simple breakfast. Then came the day's tasks: chopping and stacking firewood, mending fences, preserving food, and repairing tools. Hope proved herself a quick learner and tireless worker. Though she had been raised in town, helping in her father's store, she adapted readily to ranch life. Her hands, once soft from counting change and arranging merchandise, grew calloused from physical labor. Her skin bronzed from days spent outdoors, and her body became stronger, more resilient. Kieran noticed the changes in her, his approving glances becoming more frequent as she mastered each new skill he taught her. He was a patient teacher, demonstrating techniques without condescension, praising her successes without making a fuss. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Hope mended Kieran's shirts and socks while he carved small wooden figures: horses, cattle, birds, with impressive skill and attention to detail. He had presented her with a delicately carved chickadee on the day she successfully rounded up a stray calf on her own, her first attempt at basic cattle work. "It's beautiful," she had said, running her finger over the smooth wooden surface. "Where did you learn to carve like this?" "My grandfather," Kieran had replied, a rare smile lighting his face. "He was a furniture maker back in Pennsylvania, taught me the basics before he died." These small revelations about his past were precious to Hope. Kieran shared them sparingly, each one a gift of trust. In return, she told him about her life in Murphy's, her father's store, her mother's garden, the books she loved to read, the dreams she had harbored of someday teaching in the town school. "Why didn't you?" Kieran had asked. "Become a teacher, I mean." Hope had sighed, remembering. "My father needed me at the store after Mother died, and then, as I got older, there were expectations that I would marry, have children." She had smiled ruefully. "Not that I didn't want those things, but I wanted them on my terms with someone I chose. Not someone like James Harker, who saw me as just another acquisition." Kieran had nodded, understanding in his eyes. Some men can't tell the difference between a woman and a prize horse. The remark had made Hope laugh, breaking the melancholy that had settled over her. It was one of the things she was coming to appreciate about Kieran: his ability to cut through pretense and see to the heart of matters. As November progressed, the weather grew harsher. The first significant snowfall came in the middle of the month, a foot of powder that transformed the valley into a glittering white expanse. Hope stood at the cabin window, watching in wonder as the landscape disappeared under the pristine blanket. "It's beautiful," she breathed when Kieran joined her. "Like everything's been made new." He studied her profile, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's one way of looking at it. Also means more work, paths to clear, animals to check on. Always practical, aren't you?" Hope teased, turning to him with a smile. "Have to be out here," he replied, but there was warmth in his eyes that belied the pragmatic words. "Bundle up if you're coming out. Wind's got a bite to it." They spent the morning clearing paths to the barn and chicken coop, working side by side with shovels. The physical labor kept them warm despite the chill in the air, and Hope found herself laughing as Kieran demonstrated how to toss the snow in high arcs to create walls along the paths. "Keeps them from filling in as quickly when the wind blows," he explained, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Hope tried to copy his technique, but her first attempt sent snow cascading back onto the freshly cleared path. "Not quite," Kieran said, moving behind her. He placed his hands over hers on the shovel handle, guiding her through the motion. "Like this, smooth and steady." Hope was acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in his arms as they moved together. When she successfully launched a shovelful of snow onto the growing wall, she turned her head to smile at him in triumph. Their faces were inches apart. Hope could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the way his lashes caught tiny snowflakes. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Kieran stepped back, clearing his throat. "You've got it now," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Keep going, I'll check on the horses." Hope watched him stride toward the barn, her heart beating faster than the exertion warranted. This wasn't the first time she had felt this pull toward him, this awareness that went beyond gratitude or friendship. But it was the first time she had seen it reflected in his eyes, unmistakable despite his quick retreat. That evening, a tension hung in the air between them, not unpleasant but undeniable. They ate dinner venison stew with the last of the fresh vegetables in near silence, each stealing glances at the other when they thought they wouldn't be caught. As Hope washed the dishes, Kieran built up the fire against the increasing cold outside. Snow continued to fall, visible through the windows as swirling white in the deepening darkness. "Storm's setting in for the night," Kieran observed, joining her at the sink to dry the dishes she had washed. "Might be snowed in for a day or two." "Is that unusual for this time of year?" Hope asked, handing him a clean plate. Kieran shook his head. "No, but it's a bit early for one this heavy. Winter's coming on strong." "I'm glad I'm here and not out there," Hope said softly, looking toward the window where snow pelted the glass. Kieran's hand stilled on the dish towel. "Are you glad to be here, I mean?" Hope turned to face him, surprised by the question. "Of course. You've been nothing but kind to me, Kieran. You took me in when you had every reason not to, taught me how to survive out here." She hesitated, then added, "You believed me when no one else would." He set down the towel, his expression serious. "I know what it's like to need a second chance. To need someone to see the truth of you, not just what others say." "Because of what happened with that man you shot," Hope said, understanding. Kieran nodded. "Partly that, but also—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "The thing is, Hope, I've been alone out here a long time. By choice, mostly. Didn't trust myself around people after what happened. Didn't trust them either." "And now?" Hope asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Now I find myself trusting you," he said simply. "More than I've trusted anyone in years." The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning. Hope felt something unfurling in her chest, a feeling she had thought buried beneath fear and loss. "I trust you too," she whispered. "With my life, with—" She didn't finish the thought, suddenly afraid of saying too much, of pushing him away. Kieran's eyes searched hers, and for a moment, Hope thought he might close the distance between them. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a second against her cheek. "It's getting late," he said, his voice low. "We should get some rest. Plenty of work tomorrow, clearing all this snow." Hope nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Hope." As she lay in her bed that night, listening to the howl of the wind outside, Hope replayed the moment in her mind. The warmth of his hand, the intensity in his eyes. There had been something there, something real. But Kieran was holding back, and Hope suspected she knew why. Her situation was precarious. She was a fugitive, dependent on his protection. Any relationship that developed between them would be complicated by those facts. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, Hope found herself dreaming of a future where those complications no longer existed. A future where she was free to love and be loved, not out of necessity or gratitude, but out of genuine affection and respect. A future, perhaps, with Kieran Nash. The storm raged for 3 days, dumping nearly 3 feet of snow across the valley. Confined to the cabin except for brief excursions to tend to the animals, Hope and Kieran found themselves in closer quarters than ever before. They passed the time with domestic tasks, mending clothes, preparing meals, taking inventory of their supplies, and with conversation that grew increasingly personal as the hours stretched on. Kieran spoke more of his childhood in Pennsylvania, of his parents' deaths from typhoid when he was 15 and his brother 12, of the aunt who had raised them afterward. Hope shared memories of her mother, her laugh, her skill with a needle, her love of poetry, and of the dreams she had nurtured before the fire changed everything. "What will you do when spring comes?" Kieran asked on the afternoon of the 3rd day. They sat at the table, mugs of coffee warming their hands, watching through the window as the snowfall finally began to ease. Hope considered the question, her heart heavy. "I don't know. I can't go back to Murphy's, not while Harker has influence there." "You could start fresh somewhere else," Kieran suggested. "California's a big state. Or you could head east, maybe." The thought of leaving, of never seeing Kieran again after their shared winter, filled Hope with a sadness she wasn't prepared for. "Perhaps," she said non-committally. "What about you? Will you stay here indefinitely?" Kieran gazed out at the snow-covered landscape. "It's home now. Can't imagine being anywhere else." "Don't you ever get lonely?" The question slipped out before Hope could stop it. Kieran's eyes found hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "I used to," he admitted. "Not so much lately." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Before Hope could respond, a sound outside caught Kieran's attention, the distant jingle of bells. "Someone's coming," he said, rising quickly from the table. "Get your things. Hide in the root cellar." Fear gripped Hope's heart as she hurried to gather her few possessions. The root cellar was accessible through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, a cool, dark space where Kieran stored vegetables, preserved meats, and extra supplies. "Quickly," Kieran urged, lifting the trapdoor. "Stay quiet no matter what you hear." Hope descended the wooden steps, clutching her bundle. The cellar was cold but not unbearable, lined with shelves stocked with food and supplies. "I'll come for you when it's safe," Kieran promised, his face grave. "If I don't—" He hesitated. "If I don't, wait until nightfall, then take the path behind the barn. It leads to a cave in the hillside. There are supplies there, food, blankets, ammunition. Stay there until you're sure it's safe to move on." "Kieran," Hope began, fear making her voice tremble. "It'll be all right," he assured her, though his expression belied the confident words. "Probably just a neighbor needing help, but we can't take chances." He closed the trapdoor, plunging Hope into semi-darkness. The only light came from thin cracks between the floorboards above, allowing her to see vague outlines of the shelves and stored goods around her. She heard Kieran moving about the cabin, then the creak of the front door opening. Voices drifted down to her, muffled but audible, Kieran's deep tones and another man's higher, nasal voice. "Looking for a woman," the stranger was saying. "Fugitive from Murphy's. Burned half the town down back in October." "Haven't seen any strangers," Kieran replied, his voice calm and steady. "Been snowed in for days anyway. No one could travel in this." "Mind if I look around?" the man asked. $500 reward, worth being thorough." Hope's heart raced and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle any sound. Above, she could hear Kieran's measured footsteps as he presumably led the visitor through the cabin. "Live alone out here, Nash?" the man asked, his voice clearer now, directly above the cellar. "Yep, just me and the livestock. Pretty isolated." Most men would want company, especially with winter setting in. "Never been much for company," Kieran replied dryly. The footsteps moved away toward the bedrooms. Hope strained to hear, catching only fragments of conversation. Then the voices returned to the main room. "Satisfied?" Kieran asked. "For now," the man replied, "but I'll be checking back. That woman's got to be somewhere. Trail led this direction before the snow." "If I see anyone, I'll ride into town," Kieran assured him. "Could use that reward money myself." There was the sound of the door opening again, and then silence for several long minutes. Hope remained perfectly still, scarcely daring to breathe until the trapdoor opened, revealing Kieran's relieved face. "He's gone," Kieran said, extending a hand to help her up. "Bounty hunter named Jenkins." Not the brightest, thankfully. Hope climbed out of the cellar on shaky legs, relief making her dizzy. "He said the trail led this way. They know I came in this direction." "He was bluffing," Kieran said. "If they had a trail, they'd have been here weeks ago before the first snow." He closed the trapdoor, then moved to the window, watching as the bounty hunter's horse and sleigh disappeared down the snowy track. "Still, it means they haven't given up looking for you." Hope sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "I've put you in danger." "If they find out you've been hiding me, they won't," Kieran said firmly. "The snow's our ally now. No one's getting through those drifts without a lot of effort. By the time the passes clear in spring, we'll have figured something out." Hope looked up at him, struck by his use of we. "You're still willing to help me, even knowing they're actively searching." Kieran knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Hope, listen to me. I'm not going to turn you over to them. Not now, not ever. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Why? Why risk so much for me?" Kieran seemed to struggle with his answer, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. Finally, he said, "Because I believe in you, because I—" He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Because I care about what happens to you." The words were simple, but the emotion behind them was profound. Hope felt it resonating within her, matching the feelings that had been growing in her own heart. "I care about you too," she whispered. "More than I should, perhaps." Kieran's hands tightened on hers. "There's no should about it, Hope. What's between us, whatever it is, it's real. At least it is for me." "For me too," she admitted, her voice barely audible. For a moment they stayed like that, hands clasped, eyes locked, the truth of their feelings finally spoken aloud. Then Kieran rose, reluctantly releasing her hands. "We need to be careful," he said. "Jenkins might come back or send others. We should be prepared." Hope nodded, understanding the practicality of his concerns even as her heart yearned for more of the connection they had just acknowledged. "What should we do?" "First, we move your things to my room," Kieran said. "If anyone comes looking, they'll see only one bedroom in use. I'll sleep by the fire." Hope started to protest, but Kieran held up a hand. "It's safer this way. Also, I want to show you how to use a rifle, just in case." The rest of the day was spent implementing Kieran's precautions. Hope moved her few possessions to his bedroom, noting the simple furnishings: a larger bed than hers, a chest of drawers, a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. It felt strange and intimate to be in his personal space, to sleep where he had slept. Outside, once the weather cleared enough to venture beyond the cabin, Kieran taught her how to handle his Winchester rifle. Hope had never fired a gun before and found the weight and power of it intimidating. "I'm not sure I could actually shoot someone," she confessed as they stood behind the barn, aiming at makeshift targets Kieran had set up. "It's not about wanting to," Kieran said. "It's about being able to if you have no other choice, if it's your life or theirs." Hope nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She focused on his instructions, on the feel of the rifle in her hands, on the mechanics of loading, aiming, and firing. By the end of their practice session, she could hit the targets with reasonable accuracy, though the recoil left her shoulder sore. That night, as she lay in Kieran's bed, surrounded by his scent, a mixture of pine, soap, and something uniquely him, Hope stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with the events of the day. The bounty hunter's visit had shattered the sense of security she had been building, reminding her that the world outside their valley had not forgotten her, had not stopped seeking justice for a crime she hadn't committed. And yet, alongside the fear ran a current of hope, sparked by Kieran's confession. He cared for her, perhaps even felt the same deepening affection that she experienced whenever she looked at him, spoke with him, worked beside him. What might have developed naturally between them over the course of the winter now seemed fraught with urgency and uncertainty. If the bounty hunters returned in force, if they were discovered, their time together could be cut brutally short. The thought made Hope's chest ache with a fierce longing. She wanted more time with Kieran, not just days or weeks, but years. She wanted to help him build his ranch, to stand beside him as the seasons turned, to create a life together out of the ashes of their separate pasts. But first, they had to survive the winter and the hunt for the woman accused of burning Murphy's to the ground. December arrived with more snow and bitter cold. Kieran and Hope fell into a new routine, one shaped by caution and heightened awareness of potential threats. Each morning, Kieran would scan the valley from the cabin's windows before venturing out to check on the animals. Hope would remain inside, ready to hide in the root cellar at the first sign of visitors. Most days passed without incident, filled with the necessary work of winter on a ranch, tending livestock, maintaining the cabin against the cold, preparing meals from their stored provisions. The isolation that might once have felt oppressive now seemed protective, a barrier between them and those who would separate them. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from Kieran's small collection of books, sometimes talking in low voices about their pasts and, increasingly, their hopes for the future. "Have you ever thought of expanding the ranch?" Hope asked one night as they sat side by side on the small sofa, a quilt draped over their laps against the chill that seeped in despite the blazing fire. Kieran considered the question, his profile illuminated by the firelight. "Thought about it. Land to the north could be good for more cattle." "And the house?" He hesitated. "Always meant to add onto it someday, another bedroom or two, a proper parlor." "For a family," Hope said softly, understanding what remained unsaid. Kieran turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Yes, for a family." The air between them seemed to thicken with possibility, with unspoken desires. Hope's heart raced as Kieran's hand found hers beneath the quilt, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Hope," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "when this is over, when you're safe." "Yes," she prompted when he fell silent. Kieran took a deep breath. "I want you to stay, not because you need shelter or protection, but because you want to, because we could build something here together." Joy welled up in Hope's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "I want that too," she whispered. "I've never felt like I belonged anywhere the way I feel I belong here, with you." Kieran's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. "I never thought I'd find someone who would understand the life I've built here, who would see its value, who would see me past what happened before." "I see you," Hope assured him, leaning into his touch. "All of you." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, a culmination of months of growing affection, of shared work and worry, of quiet moments and meaningful glances. Kieran's lips were warm against hers, tentative at first, then more confident as Hope responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. Hope smiled, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Why didn't you? Wasn't sure you felt the same, and I didn't want you to think." He paused, "Didn't want you to feel obligated because of the situation." "I don't," Hope assured him, pulling back slightly to meet his gaze. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. It's about who you are, Kieran. Your kindness, your strength, your integrity." He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her closer. Hope felt as though she were melting into him, all the fear and uncertainty of the past months giving way to a profound sense of rightness, of homecoming. When they separated, Kieran kept his arms around her, his expression serious despite the tenderness in his eyes. "We still need to be careful," he said. "Until we can clear your name, you're in danger." "I know," Hope sighed, reality intruding on the moment. "But how can we do that? Harker's word against mine, and he has all the power in Murphy's." Kieran was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. "Maybe not all the power," he finally said. "You mentioned your father wasn't in town when the fire started. He must know you're innocent." "Yes, but even if we could get word to him, what could he do against Harker?" Hope asked. "On his own, maybe not much," Kieran conceded. "But if we could find other witnesses, people who saw the fire start in the saloon." Hope straightened, an idea forming. "The saloon keeper, Mr. Donovan. He was there that night. I saw him just before I closed the store. He was arguing with one of his suppliers about a shipment of whiskey." "That's something," Kieran said, his mind clearly working through possibilities. If this Donovan saw the fire start in his own establishment, his testimony could counter Harker's. "If he's still alive," Hope said soberly. "And if he's willing to speak against the most influential man in town." Kieran took her hands in his expression resolute. "Come spring, we'll find out. My friend in Sacramento, the former lawman I mentioned, he's good at finding people, gathering information discreetly. We'll write to him as soon as the pass is clear, ask him to look into Donovan to find your father." Hope nodded, hope kindling within her despite the obstacles. "And until then," Kieran's smile was soft, intimate. "Until then, we have this place and each other. We prepare for whatever comes, and we don't waste a single day we have together." They sealed the promise with another kiss, the fire crackling beside them as the wind howled outside, carrying snow against the windows. In that moment, despite the uncertainties that lay ahead, Hope felt truly safe for the first time since fleeing Murphy's. Not just because of the sturdy walls around them or Kieran's protective presence, but because of the love growing between them, a foundation upon which she could begin to rebuild her life, regardless of what the future held. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive spirit despite their isolated circumstances. Kieran surprised Hope one morning by bringing in a small pine tree he had cut from the edge of his property, setting it up in the corner of the main room. "Thought we could use some cheer," he explained as Hope stared in delight at the fragrant evergreen. "Used to be a tradition in my family, decorating a tree for Christmas." Together, they fashioned simple ornaments from items around the cabin, strips of colored fabric tied in bows, pine cones gathered from beneath the snow, small wooden figures Kieran carved specially for the occasion. They strung popcorn into garlands and placed candles carefully among the branches, to be lit only on Christmas Eve, on Christmas morning. Hope woke to the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. She dressed quickly in the woolen dress she had made from fabric Kieran had found in a trunk likely belonging to his mother or grandmother, he had said when offering it to her. The deep green color suited her, bringing out the auburn in her hair and the gold flecks in her eyes. Kieran looked up as she entered the main room, his expression warming at the sight of her in the dress. "Merry Christmas," he said, gesturing to the table, where a simple but festive breakfast awaited flapjacks with preserved berries, strips of bacon, and steaming mugs of coffee. "Merry Christmas," Hope replied, touched by his efforts. "It looks wonderful." They ate together, talking of Christmases past Hope's memories of helping her mother prepare feasts for friends and neighbors, Kieran's recollections of snowball fights with his brother, and sledding down hills near their Pennsylvania home. After breakfast, Kieran reached beneath the decorated tree and pulled out a small package wrapped in plain paper and tied with a piece of red ribbon. "For you," he said, looking almost shy as he handed it to her. "It's not much, but—" Hope took the package, touched beyond words that he had thought to prepare a gift for her. Carefully, she untied the ribbon and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box, its surface polished to a warm glow. Opening it, she gasped at what lay inside: a delicate wooden pendant in the shape of a heart, hanging from a leather cord. The heart was intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and vines, the craftsmanship exquisite. "Kieran," she breathed, lifting the pendant from the box. "It's beautiful." "Made it from a piece of cherry wood I've been saving," he explained, watching her face. "Do you like it?" "I love it," Hope said, blinking back tears of happiness. "Will you put it on for me?" Kieran took the pendant from her hands, moving behind her as she lifted her hair. She felt the warmth of his fingers against her skin as he fastened the cord around her neck, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. "I have something for you too," Hope said when he had moved back to face her, "though it's not as skillfully made." She retrieved a package from where she had hidden it in the kitchen, presenting it to him with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Kieran unwrapped it to find a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool, matching the color of his eyes. "I've been working on it in the evenings when you were busy with the animals," Hope explained as he ran his fingers over the soft wool. "I'm not the best knitter, but it's perfect," Kieran interrupted, wrapping the scarf around his neck. "Warm too, thank you, Hope." He leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that conveyed his appreciation more effectively than words. Hope melted into the kiss, her hand coming up to touch the wooden pendant at her throat, a tangible symbol of the bond that had formed between them. The day passed in quiet celebration. They prepared a special dinner: roast venison with dried herbs, potatoes from the root cellar, and a small cake made with precious sugar Kieran had been saving for a special occasion. As darkness fell, they lit the candles on the tree, their warm glow casting dancing shadows across the walls of the cabin. Sitting before the fire later that evening, Hope nestled against Kieran's side, his arm around her shoulders. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and silent, adding to the sense of peaceful isolation. "This has been the best Christmas I can remember," Hope said, watching the flames. "Despite everything, the fire, being a fugitive, I've never felt more at peace than I do right now, here with you." Kieran tightened his arm around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Being with you has changed this place, Hope, changed me. Before you came, I was just existing out here, going through the motions. Now—" He paused, searching for words. "Now I'm living again. Planning for a future, not just surviving day to day." Hope turned in his embrace to look up at him, her heart full. "I love you, Kieran," she said simply, the words she had held back for weeks finally finding voice. "Whatever happens when spring comes, I want you to know that." Kieran's eyes darkened with emotion. "I love you too, Hope. Have for a while now, and I promise you we'll find a way to clear your name. We'll build a life here together if that's what you want." "It's all I want," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. When he kissed her this time, there was a new urgency to it, a deeper passion that spoke of their shared longing and the promise of a future together. Hope responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck, drawing him closer. Later, as they lay together in what was now their bed, skin against skin beneath the warmth of quilts and blankets, Hope felt a sense of completion she had never known was possible. In Kieran's arms, she had found not just safety but belonging, not just passion but partnership. In loving him, in being loved by him, she had begun to rebuild not just a home but herself. As sleep claimed her, Hope thought of the wooden heart resting against her own, a symbol of resilience, of beauty crafted from raw material, of something enduring created by loving hands. Like the cabin around them, like the life they were forging together, it represented the possibility of creating something new from what remained after loss and hardship. It represented hope. January and February passed in a blur of short days and long nights, snow and wind alternating with brief periods of crystal-clear skies that revealed stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Hope and Kieran settled into a rhythm of shared work and shared intimacy, learning each other's habits, preferences, and bodies with equal dedication. They spoke often of the future, of expanding the cabin come spring, of increasing the cattle herd, of perhaps starting a vegetable garden larger than the current one. Hope suggested they might sell preserves and baked goods in the nearest town, while Kieran thought her skill with numbers might be put to use keeping books for neighboring ranchers. These plans always carried the unspoken caveat: if they could clear Hope's name, if they could secure her freedom from the false accusations that still hung over her. Neither wanted to dwell on the alternative, on the possibility that Hope might have to live forever in hiding, or worse, be captured and returned to Murphy's to face trial. March brought the first signs of spring, patches of bare ground appearing as the snow receded, the sound of water running beneath the ice in the stream, birds returning from their winter migrations. With the changing season came increased vigilance. As the mountain passes became more navigable, the risk of visitors, welcome or otherwise, grew. Kieran began making regular scouting trips to the ridge above the valley, watching for any sign of approaching travelers. Hope stayed close to the cabin, ready to hide at a moment's notice, the Winchester rifle always within reach. It was on one such morning in late March, with Kieran up at the ridge, that Hope heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart racing, she grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. 2 riders were coming up the path to the cabin, men she didn't recognize, their horses moving at an unhurried pace. Not bounty hunters, then, or at least not ones in a hurry to claim their prize. Still, she couldn't take chances. Quickly, Hope moved to the root cellar, descending the steps and pulling the trapdoor closed above her. In the semi-darkness, she could hear the muffled sound of boots on the cabin's porch, then a knock at the door. When no answer came, there was a pause, then the creak of the door opening. Kieran never locked it, a common practice in these parts, where travelers might need shelter in an emergency. Hope held her breath as footsteps moved across the floor above her, directly over the cellar. She could make out fragments of conversation between the 2 men. Nash's place, all right. Not here now. Wait or come back. The footsteps moved toward the bedrooms, then returned to the main room. Hope clutched the rifle tighter, her finger near the trigger, though she prayed she wouldn't have to use it. After what seemed an eternity, she heard the door open and close again. Through the cracks in the floorboards, she could see the cabin was empty once more. Still, she waited, counting slowly to 100 before cautiously pushing open the trapdoor and emerging from her hiding place. The cabin appeared undisturbed. Nothing was missing or out of place. Hope moved to the window, watching as the two riders headed back down the path. As they disappeared from view, another figure appeared on the ridge. Kieran, running at full speed toward the cabin, having evidently spotted the visitors from his vantage point. He burst through the door minutes later, breathless with exertion and worry. "Are you all right? I saw riders." "I'm fine," Hope assured him, setting down the rifle to embrace him. "They came, looked around, and left. I hid in the cellar the whole time." Kieran held her tightly, his heart hammering against her cheek. "Did you recognize them? Were they bounty hunters?" Hope shook her head. "I don't think so. They seemed more like they were looking for you than for me. I overheard them use your name." Kieran frowned, releasing her to move to the window. What did they look like? One was tall, thin. The other shorter, with a beard. Both dressed like cowboys or ranch hands, not lawmen. Kieran's frown deepened. Could be hands from the marshal spread over the next ridge. "They've been having trouble with wolves taking calves. Might have come looking to see if we've had the same problem." "Or they could be looking for me," Hope said softly. "The reward is still out there, Kieran. $500 would tempt a lot of people." He turned to her, his expression resolute. "All the more reason to put our plan in motion. The passes are clear enough now. I'll ride to Sonora tomorrow, post that letter to my friend in Sacramento. Ask him to start looking into Donovan and your father." Hope nodded, though anxiety knotted her stomach at the thought of Kieran leaving, even for a day or two. In the months they had been together, they had rarely been apart for more than a few hours. "I'll be careful," Kieran promised, reading her concern. "No one in Sonora knows about you." "I'll post the letter and come straight back." "I know," Hope said, forcing a smile. "I just worry." Kieran gathered her in his arms again, his voice soft against her hair. "I'll always come back to you, Hope. Always." The next morning dawned clear and mild, perfect for the journey to Sonora. Kieran prepared his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Buck, packing enough supplies for 2 days on the trail. Hope stood in the yard, watching as he secured the last of his provisions to the saddle. They had spent the night planning what to write in the letter to Kieran's friend, Howard Merrick, a former U.S. Marshal now working as a private investigator in Sacramento. The letter explained Hope's situation in detail, asking Merrick to discreetly locate Timothy Donovan, the saloon keeper, and Thomas Wilson, Hope's father, both of whom might be able to provide testimony countering James Harker's accusations. "Remember, stay inside as much as possible," Kieran instructed as he mounted Buck. "If anyone comes, use the cellar. If there's real trouble, take the path to the cave as we discussed." Hope nodded, memorizing his features as if she might never see them again, though she knew such fears were irrational. "Be safe," she said, reaching up to touch his hand where it rested on the saddle horn. Kieran leaned down to kiss her, lingering a moment longer than necessary. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too," Hope replied. "Now go before I change my mind and beg you to stay." With a final smile, Kieran turned Buck toward the trail and rode away, looking back once to wave before disappearing around a bend. Hope stood watching long after he was out of sight, a sense of foreboding settling over her despite the bright spring day. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Hope kept busy with chores, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, tidying the cabin. By mid-afternoon, she had run out of tasks and found herself pacing from window to window, watching for any sign of movement on the trails leading to the cabin. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Hope lit the lamps and prepared a simple dinner, though she had little appetite. She was setting the table, more out of habit than need, when a sound outside froze her in place. Horses, multiple sets of hoofbeats, approaching rapidly. Fear surged through her as she rushed to the window. 4 riders were coming up the path, moving fast with purpose. Even in the fading light, she could see that one of them was the bounty hunter, Jenkins, who had visited earlier in the winter. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Hope forced herself to think clearly. The root cellar wouldn't be enough. They would surely search more thoroughly this time. She needed to reach the cave Kieran had told her about. Quickly, she grabbed the rifle, a small sack of provisions she kept ready for just such an emergency, and a heavy shawl against the evening chill. Slipping out the back door, she hurried toward the barn, keeping to the shadows as the riders neared the cabin. From inside the barn, Hope watched as the men dismounted, Jenkins barking orders to the others to surround the place. There was no time to lose. She slipped out the back of the barn and ran for the tree line, following the narrow path Kieran had shown her that led up into the hills behind the property. The cave was nearly a mile away, hidden among rocks and trees on a steep hillside. Hope moved as quickly as she dared in the gathering darkness, the sound of shouts from the cabin spurring her on. They had discovered she wasn't there, which meant they would soon begin searching the outbuildings and surrounding area. By the time she reached the cave, night had fallen completely. Hope paused at the entrance, straining her eyes and ears for any sign of pursuit. Hearing nothing but the wind in the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl, she ducked inside, feeling her way forward until her hands touched the supplies Kieran had stashed there: blankets, a lantern with matches, dried food, water, and ammunition for the rifle. She didn't dare light the lantern, fearing the glow might be visible from outside. Instead, she wrapped herself in a blanket and settled against the cave wall, the rifle across her lap, listening to the sounds of the night and praying that Kieran would return soon. Hours passed. Hope dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, real or imagined. The cave was cold despite the blanket, and her worry for Kieran grew with each passing minute. What if the bounty hunters intercepted him on his return? What if they had already done so, and that was how they knew to come to the cabin? Just before dawn, when the sky outside the cave entrance had begun to lighten, Hope heard what she had been dreading: voices, men calling to each other as they searched the hillside. They were methodical, thorough, and getting closer. Hope gripped the rifle, her heart pounding. She had practiced shooting with Kieran, but the thought of actually firing at another human being made her stomach turn. Still, if it came to a choice between capture and defending herself, she knew what she would have to do. The voices grew closer. Hope could make out Jenkins' nasal tone giving directions. They knew about the cave or had guessed its existence. Perhaps they had tortured the information out of Kieran. No, she couldn't think that way. Kieran was smart, capable. He was probably on his way back right now, unaware of the danger. A shadow fell across the cave entrance. Hope raised the rifle, her hands shaking but her aim steady, just as Kieran had taught her. "She's in here," a voice called. "I can see movement." "Careful," Jenkins replied. "Nash said she's armed." Hope's breath caught. Nash said, had Kieran betrayed her? No, it wasn't possible. Not after everything they had shared, the love they had built. "Miss Wilson," Jenkins called into the cave. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and no one needs to get hurt." "Go away," Hope shouted back, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm innocent. I didn't start that fire." "That's for a judge to decide, miss. We're just here to bring you in." I won't go back to Murphy's, Hope declared. Not to face a corrupt justice bought and paid for by James Harker. There was a pause, then another voice, not Jenkins, called out, "Hope, Hope, is that you?" The familiar voice sent a shock through her system. "Father," she gasped, unable to believe her ears. "It's me, Hope," Thomas Wilson called. "Please come out. These men aren't taking you to Murphy's. We're here to help." Confusion and hope warred within her. Could it truly be her father? Or was it a trick to lure her out? "Prove it's you," she demanded. "Tell me something only my father would know." "You have a scar on your left wrist from when you fell into Mrs. Perkins' rosebush on your 9th birthday," the voice replied without hesitation. "And you sleep with your mother's locket under your pillow, or at least you did back home." Tears sprang to Hope's eyes. It was him. It had to be. No one else could know those details. Still cautious, she called, "Are you alone? Is Harker with you?" "No Harker," her father assured her. "Just me, the bounty hunter who found me in San Francisco, and 2 deputies from Sacramento. And—" his voice faltered. "And your friend, Mr. Nash. Kieran." Hope's heart leaped. "Is he all right?" "I'm here, Hope," Kieran's voice came, strained but unmistakable. "It's safe to come out." "I promise." Relief flooding through her, Hope lowered the rifle and moved toward the cave entrance. As she emerged into the gray light of dawn, she saw them: Jenkins, 2 men wearing deputy badges, her father, and Kieran, whose hands, she noted with alarm, were bound behind his back. "What's going on?" she demanded, raising the rifle again. "Why is Kieran tied up?" "Easy, miss," one of the deputies said, holding up his hands. "No need for that weapon." "Hope," her father stepped forward, his familiar face lined with worry and relief. "Please, let me explain." Hope looked from him to Kieran, who nodded encouragingly despite his bonds. Slowly, she lowered the rifle, though she didn't relinquish her grip on it. "I've been searching for you ever since the fire," Thomas Wilson began, his voice thick with emotion. "When I returned to Murphy's and found half the town in ashes and you gone, accused of setting the blaze." He shook his head. "I knew it couldn't be true, not my Hope." "It wasn't," Hope confirmed, her eyes still on Kieran. "But why is Kieran tied up? He's been protecting me all these months." "That's what we need to sort out," the older of the 2 deputies said. "When Mr. Nash rode into Sonora yesterday and started asking questions about the fire in Murphy's, it raised some flags. Jenkins here had been watching the town, hoping you might try to make contact with someone. He followed Nash back toward this valley." "I had no choice but to come clean," Kieran said, meeting Hope's gaze steadily. "Told them you were here, that you're innocent, and that I had evidence to prove it." "Evidence?" Hope asked, confused. Kieran nodded toward the deputies. "Show her." The younger deputy reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Affidavit from Timothy Donovan, owner of the Murphy's Saloon. States that on the night of the fire, he saw James Harker in his establishment, drunk and angry. Harker knocked over a lamp while arguing with another patron, starting the fire. Donovan tried to put it out, but it spread too quickly." Hope stared at the document, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "So there's proof. Actual proof of my innocence. There's more," her father said. "3 other witnesses have come forward since I started making inquiries. People who saw Harker near the saloon that night, heard him ranting about you after you refused his proposal." "And Harker?" Hope asked. "Under arrest in Sacramento," the older deputy replied. Turns out the fire was just the tip of the iceberg. Once people started talking, all sorts of misdeeds came to light: fraud, extortion, even suspicion of involvement in 2 deaths previously ruled accidental. Hope's legs felt suddenly weak, and she sank down onto a nearby rock. "I'm free." "Truly free, you are, Hope," her father confirmed, moving to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "The charges against you have been dropped. You can come home." "Home." The word resonated strangely in Hope's mind. Murphy's had been home once, but now. She looked at Kieran, still standing with his hands bound. "Why is he still tied up?" she demanded. "If you know I'm innocent, if you know he was protecting me, why treat him like a criminal?" The deputies exchanged glances, then the older one shrugged and moved to untie Kieran's hands. Precaution, mostly. When a man admits to harboring a fugitive, even one wrongly accused, we have to be careful. Kieran rubbed his wrists as the ropes fell away, his eyes never leaving Hope's. "I'm sorry for the deception," he said. "When they intercepted me on the trail back from Sonora, I had to make a choice: tell them the truth and hope they'd listen, or deny everything and risk them finding you anyway." Hope rose from the rock, moving toward him, her heart full. "You made the right choice," she said softly. Thomas Wilson watched the exchange, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Hope," he said quietly, "is there something you want to tell me about Mr. Nash?" Hope turned to her father, suddenly aware of how this must look her obvious concern for Kieran, the months they had spent alone together in his cabin. Propriety would demand shock, disapproval, but the tender expression on her father's face held only curiosity and what seemed like cautious approval. "Father," Hope said, reaching for Kieran's hand, "Kieran saved me when I had nowhere else to turn. He believed in me, protected me, taught me to survive out here." She took a deep breath. "And I love him. We love each other." Thomas nodded, a small smile playing around his lips. "I suspected as much from the way he spoke of you, with such conviction." Hope turned to Kieran, who was watching her with a mixture of love and uncertainty. "What happens now?" she asked. "You heard my father, I can go home. But home isn't necessarily Murphy's anymore," Kieran finished for her. He glanced at Thomas Wilson, then back to Hope. "If you'll have me, if your father approves, I'd like to make our arrangement more permanent." Hope's breath caught. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Kieran nodded, taking both her hands in his. "Hope Wilson, will you marry me? Help me build this ranch into something we can be proud of, raise a family here, grow old together." "Yes," Hope whispered, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, of course I will." Kieran pulled her into his arms, kissing her as if they were alone, not surrounded by her father, a bounty hunter, and two somewhat amused deputies. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Thomas Wilson cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his own eyes suspiciously bright, "I suppose I should get to know the man my daughter intends to marry." The group made their way back to the cabin, where Hope prepared breakfast for everyone while Kieran and her father talked. Jenkins and the deputies, satisfied that their mission was complete, soon departed, heading back to Sacramento to file their final reports on the case. As Hope moved about the kitchen, listening to the deep rumble of Kieran's voice and her father's occasional questions, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The nightmare that had begun with the fire in Murphy's had led her, by a strange and difficult path, to exactly where she was meant to be. Later, as they stood on the porch watching her father prepare to leave, he would return for the wedding, planned for June, but had business to attend to. In the meantime, Hope leaned against Kieran's side, his arm secure around her waist. "I never imagined when I ran from Murphy's that night that I would find not just safety but love," she mused. "That from the ashes of that fire would come something so beautiful." Kieran pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice low and filled with promise. "We'll build something lasting here, Hope. Something that will endure long after we're gone." "We already have," Hope replied, turning in his arms to look up at him. "We've built a home. Not just the cabin, the ranch, though we'll keep improving those, but what's between us. That's the foundation that matters." Kieran's smile was tender as he traced the outline of the wooden heart pendant he had carved for her, which still hung around her neck. "From the moment you collapsed at the edge of my property, something changed here. You brought life back to this place, Hope. Back to me. And you taught me to rebuild," she said softly. "Not just a life, but myself, my confidence, my strength." As the sun rose higher in the clear spring sky, warming the valley and coaxing new growth from the winter-dormant earth, Hope and Kieran stood together, looking out over the land that would be their legacy. Behind them lay the pain of the past, a fire Hope hadn't started, a shot Kieran hadn't meant to fire. Before them stretched a future they would create together, day by day, season by season, year by year. A future built not despite their hardships, but because of them, forged in fire, tested by trial and emerging stronger for the tempering. A future built on love. The wedding took place as planned on a perfect June day. The small cabin was filled to overflowing with guests, Hope's father, of course, but also Kieran's brother Kyle, who had come from San Francisco upon receiving news of the engagement. Howard Merrick, the former marshal who had helped clear Hope's name, and a few neighbors from surrounding ranches who had become friends in the months since Hope's innocence had been established. Hope wore a simple white dress her father had brought from San Francisco, with wildflowers in her hair and Kieran's carved pendant around her neck. Kieran, usually seen in work clothes, had donned a new black suit for the occasion, his hair trimmed and his face clean-shaven, revealing the strong line of his jaw and the warmth of his smile as Hope walked toward him on her father's arm. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, conducted by a circuit-riding preacher who had arrived the day before. As Hope and Kieran exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the seasons of their lives together, Hope felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food and drink, music from a neighbor's fiddle, and dancing in the yard under the stars. When the last guest had departed, some to return to distant homes, others to sleep in tents set up nearby, Hope and Kieran stood alone on the porch of their cabin, now truly theirs together in every sense. "Mrs. Nash," Kieran murmured, drawing her close, "has a nice ring to it." Hope smiled up at him, her husband, her partner, her love. "It does, doesn't it? Though I'll have to practice signing it." "We have time," Kieran assured her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "A lifetime to practice." The summer passed in a blur of work and joy as they implemented the plans they had dreamed of during the long winter months. With help from neighbors and Kyle, who stayed on for a few weeks after the wedding, they began the expansion of the cabin, adding a larger bedroom, a proper kitchen, and a small sitting room that Hope envisioned filled with books and, eventually, children's toys. They increased the cattle herd, purchasing additional animals from a rancher who was scaling down his operation due to age. Hope learned to ride better, to help with roundups and branding, skills she had never imagined acquiring as a shopkeeper's daughter in Murphy's. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, talking of the day's work and their plans for tomorrow, next week, next year. Sometimes they would simply sit in contented silence, Hope's head on Kieran's shoulder, their hands intertwined. No words needed to express the depth of their connection. Autumn brought the harvest, and with it, Hope's discovery that their family would expand in the spring. Kieran's joy at the news was boundless. He swept Hope into his arms and twirled her around the yard, his laughter echoing off the hills. "A child," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Our child." As Hope's body changed with the growing life inside her, Kieran became even more protective, insisting on taking on the more strenuous chores himself. Hope allowed it to a point, knowing it stemmed from love, but maintained her independence in other ways, continuing to manage the household, keep the books for the ranch, and ride short distances on the gentlest of their horses until her condition made it impractical. Winter came again, snow blanketing the valley just as it had the year before when Hope had first arrived. But this time, there was no fear, no hiding, only the peaceful isolation of a couple preparing for the next chapter in their lives together. On a crisp April morning, with wildflowers just beginning to bloom across the valley, William Thomas Nash entered the world after a long night of labor. He had Kieran's dark hair and Hope's golden-flecked eyes, and from his first breath, he was the center of his parents' world. "He's perfect," Kieran whispered as he held his son for the first time, awe and trepidation mingling in his expression. "I never thought I'd have this, Hope, a family of my own." "Nor did I," Hope admitted, exhausted but radiant. "Not after everything that happened, but here we are." "Here we are," Kieran agreed, leaning down to kiss her gently. "Thank you for this gift, for our son, for everything you've brought into my life." As William grew, so did the ranch and the family. 2 years later, a daughter joined them, Sarah Marie, named for both their mothers. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the success of the ranch allowed them to hire help, especially during the busiest seasons. Thomas Wilson visited often, delighting in his grandchildren, and in seeing his daughter so happy and fulfilled. Kyle, too, became a regular visitor, bringing news and gifts from San Francisco, though he always claimed to be relieved to return to the city after a few weeks of ranch life. Over the years, Hope and Kieran faced challenges: droughts that threatened the cattle, a fire, ironically, that destroyed part of the barn, illness that swept through the valley one harsh winter. But they faced each trial together, drawing strength from each other and from the life they had built. When Hope looked back on the night she had fled Murphy's, the fire blazing behind her and uncertainty ahead, she marveled at the path her life had taken. The accusations that had seemed like the end of everything had instead been the beginning of a journey that led her to Kieran, to their children, to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran presented Hope with another carved pendant, this one larger, depicting their family. 2 adults and 2 children, surrounded by a heart. It joined the original pendant, which Hope still wore daily, a reminder of their beginning. "From ashes to this," Kieran said as they stood on the porch that evening, watching their children play in the yard. "Sometimes I still can't believe it." "Believe it," Hope said, leaning into his embrace. "We built this, Kieran, together, with our hands and our hearts." He turned her to face him, his eyes as blue and clear as the day she had first seen them, though now lined at the corners from years of squinting in the sun, from laughter, from life. "I love you, Hope Nash," he said simply. "More with each passing day." "And I love you," she replied. "My cowboy, my teacher, my heart." As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in the same fiery hues that had once signaled destruction, but now heralded only the close of another blessed day, Hope and Kieran held each other close, grateful for the fire she hadn't started and the journey that had brought them home.